This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Smile, the makers of the brand new PDF Pen 6, PDF Pen Pro 6, and PDF Pen for iPad and PDF Pen for iPhone. Find out more about all the flavors of PDF Pen at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're going to talk about the brand new, well, that's not quite true, the latest edition of Take Control of iBooks Author 1.1 is the book version with Mr. Michael E. Cohen, the guy who wrote it. Michael, it's great to see you.
Hi, Chuck. It's good to see you, too.
Michael, I think this is the first time since we've chatted since Macworld, and it looks like you've been busy once again. When weren't you busy, Michael?
Well, people keep revising software, and then we have to write about it. Then they revise it again.
Yeah, those pesky developers. Well, no, I build this as version 1.1 of the book, but I know you said you wanted to make sure we let the viewers and listeners know that this actually covers version 2 of the software.
Right. Apple released iBooks Author version 2 early in the year. The book is version 1.1 because it's an upgrade for people who bought the first release of the book. Even so, it incorporates the changes, and if you already bought it, you get it again.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Michael, 1.1 versions usually don't really justify an upgrade to a Take Control book. Is this that big an upgrade?
Well, the thing is that a Take Control book that gets a revision that's not a huge revision will release as a point release, and people who bought the first version get a free upgrade to that book. And so it's only when we do a new edition of the book itself that you would have to buy it again, and there's usually a discount for people who bought the earlier version previously. So this one we were really on the fence because there's a lot of changes in iBooks Authors 2, but not quite enough to push this into a whole new edition of the book. But it was significantly more effort than the usual 1.1 update to a Take Control book. So we're like dancing on the edge there. I think the deciding factor for me, at least, when we talked about it, was that the book is aimed at teachers, and teachers don't have a whole lot of ready cash as a rule. So let's not be greedy.
And Michael, that's an interesting statement. So I'm going to take it sort of to its logical conclusion. Do you think iBooks Author is primarily for educators? The program, not the book, the program.
Oh, boy, that's yes and no. That's a very tough question to answer. I mean, if you go to the iBookstore, on your iPad, or, in iTunes for that matter, and you look at the section called Made with iBooks Author, you see a huge range of things. You see travel books, you see books about show business, you see art books, music books, all sorts of things that are not necessarily textbooks. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people who would use it to publish non-texty books, or books that have a lot more interactivity than an ordinary book does. However, the program itself was designed to produce textbooks. And its biggest plan is not really represented in what you see in the iBookstore, because there's a lot of people doing textbooks for specific classes in specific schools that are available to the students free, maybe from iTunes U, or distributed directly at the school, that you never see pop up in the iBookstore because they're teaching materials made by teachers for students directly. So the program is designed for textbooks, but a program designed for textbooks can produce a whole lot of other things than just textbooks.
And I guess I asked the question not just because of what you said, but also when this was announced, this really was pushed toward the educational market. But
absolutely.
Immediately, we both know people who grabbed it. David Sparks, for one, has done his field guides in iBooks Author. But I know a lot of people that said, man, I want to experiment with this. This is what I've been waiting for, a way to create a media-rich ebook. I was about to say book, ebook.
Ebook is a book,
Yeah, well, it is now. I think there was a time, and that could be a whole other conversation, but they were really excited about this. And now it seems to have not fallen off the radar, but it seems to have sort of dropped into a niche of educators, of would-be authors, people that were waiting for that tool. And if you find them and you punch that button, man, they light up like a Christmas tree. But the mainstream community doesn't seem to be quite as, I don't know.
Well, the hype mill certainly spins down very quickly when a new thing like this comes out. Because there's always going to be a next new shiny thing. Ooh, look, shiny. And you forget the thing that came before. And Apple certainly hasn't been pushing it with a huge amount of publicity, but I don't think they really have to, because it's making its way to their target markets. And also, we're 1 year into the development of this piece of software. And the whole idea of textbooks as ebooks. And so you're not going to, I don't see it smart to make a huge play about it right now. Let it grow naturally. Let's see where the problems are. Let's see what we can fix. They're building out, as well as the software, there's a whole business plan behind it, a distribution plan behind it, how they handle things in the iBookstore, how they handle distribution through other channels as well. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be done right before they can really ramp it up to a tool for everybody doing any kind of book at all. And I don't see them going there. I see them doing it to make books that are for the iPad, to help sell iPads, and to help sell iPads in places like education and in places like businesses that may need very textbooky type things as well, manuals and stuff like that. So, if Apple's making their money off of it, because the program's free. So what they're really making is, a commitment to iPads, people buying more iPads, because this is just another reason to buy an iPad. Look what you can play on an iPad. You can play these very spiffy interactive books. That's, I think, what's behind what Apple's really all about on this.
Go back just a second and touch on what you were saying, the business plan, the distribution. Is this something that, I admit I'm not aware of, is this something Apple offers or provides with iBook publishing?
Yes, as a matter of fact. There's a menu item on the file menu in iBooks Author on your Mac that says Publish. And when you choose that, it prepares a package that's designed to be submitted to Apple's iBookstore and work with the iTunes Connect website, for which you have to have an account if you want to sell through the iBookstore. And it opens up the program iTunes Producer, which if you have an iTunes Connect account, you'll have downloaded, that helps you prepare materials for submission to the iBookstore. Things, like the ISBN number, the markets you're selling it into, the descriptions of it, all sorts of information that needs to accompany your book when you put it up for sale in the iBookstore.
Interesting. So you referenced other channels. Is that something they're looking at? Like, I'll say the K word, Kindle?
Other channels, not for sale. The license for iBooks Author says you can give the book away to anyone. In a book you write, you can give it away to anyone. But if you want to sell it, you have to sell it through the iBookstore. Which means we get our 30% cut, says Apple, and goes, excellent. But
you did that a little too convincingly, Michael.
But nonetheless, giving it away is a really powerful thing, because teachers, by and large, don't write teaching materials for the money. That's part of what they do for a living, because they need materials to teach with. And so textbooks or textbook-like things that are designed for specific classes and like that, or that you can really try out before you produce a general paper textbook, is a godsend as well. And it's an easy way to do it. And any book you generate from iBooks Author, you can distribute over the web for free, or on a USB flash drive, or however other method you want to get it from one machine to another.
But again, forgive me if I'm beating on the subject. I'm really just intensely interested here in this. So the iBooks Author program cannot generate anything other than an iBook format ebook.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
Now, what is interesting about that, of course, and people who are deeply into EPUB and e-publishing will talk about endlessly, and the wars will be wonderful. Get past the popcorn. I just actually took a book that I generated from iBooks Author and dropped it on a little Apple script that I have that I ordinarily use for EPUB, which is a standard for ebooks. There's a lot of different programs for making EPUBs. And what that does is it opens it up so you can see all the files inside. If you drop an iBooks author book on that same Apple script, it unpacks it just like though it were an EPUB book. And inside it looks very, very, very much like, but not quite exactly like, an EPUB version 3 book. It's very close to the EPUB 3 standard, which was released about a year ago, that is for interactive ebooks. So things like iBooks Author, not iBooks Author itself, but other software could very easily do what iBooks Author does for the generally releasable EPUB 3 format, which Apple will also sell through their iBookstore, by the way. And iBooks itself on the iPad and the iPhone and the iPod Touch is compatible with EPUB 3. So,
well, that was one of the criticisms.
And it might not be all that hard if one really wanted to try, but then you'd run into all sorts of licensing issues, to change an iBooks Author book into an EPUB 3 by fiddling around with the files inside a little bit. But that would probably be a violation of the licensing. You wouldn't want to do that. But technically, it wouldn't be all that hard to do, I imagine.
Well, that was one of the criticisms when iBooks Author first came out, that this is a lock-in to Apple, that they're looking for their 30%. The free option was a way around it, but of course that doesn't put any money in the author's pocket, yada, yada, yada. And
it's a buy-in for Apple regardless, because the only thing that will play in iBooks Author book is an iPad or an iPad mini. So, I mean, it's a way to help sell more iPads and iPad minis to schools and other places that need interactive reading materials. But, a free piece of software of the depth and complexity of iBooks Author is also nothing to be sneezed at.
See, that's a point that seemed to just get lost so many times. And my version, and I have not played with iBooks Author to any great extent. I've literally played with it is all. But content is content, and so if you're an author, if the non-iBook format means that much to you, a lot of things should just be cut and paste as far as the text goes. Now the media, probably a whole nother situation. But is it and we're a little bit off topic, but I don't think so. Is it really that difficult to take that content, move it over to another authoring platform, publish it in another format, and not mess with the license issue?
It depends on the content. It always depends upon the content. If it's mostly flowing text, there's probably no reason in the first place to go with iBooks Author, because an ordinary EPUB will do you just fine if it's just images and text. You don't need iBooks Author for that. But if you're building a book that has an interactive glossary and index built in, and one that can do the various has the various widgets that iBooks Author provides, which are interactive images and image galleries, being able to play a keynote presentation right on the page, audio and video, scrolling sidebars and all sorts of other things, then it's a little bit harder to port it to a non-iBooks Author platform, because you're buying into the Apple proprietary widgets and feature set. So again, it depends entirely on the content of your book.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the actual upgrades. We got off on the business part, which I think is fascinating. But
it's all fascinating.
Yeah. It was interesting to watch iBooks Author come out. The first time, that people started evaluating it, well, gee, I wish it had this, I wish it had that. And I guess that's natural. We all do it. So
sure.
What has been added of substance to iBooks Author 2?
Okay, the marquee features that you'll actually notice if you compare it with iBooks Author 1, just out of the virtual box, because of course you download it, it doesn't come in a box, is there are 2 new widgets that you can use for illustrating your text. The widgets are interactive things you can put on the page along with your text. And one of them are scrolling sidebars. You've seen sidebars in magazines and newspapers and like that. Little box of text off to the side of the main text. A scrolling sidebar is exactly that, except you can stuff a whole lot more into it than you can fit on the page. So when you get to the page that has a scrolling sidebar in it, you can scroll up and down and read a rather long digression. And that sidebar can contain text and images and shapes and anything else except another widget. So you can put some pretty dramatic stuff into a scrolling sidebar. A popover is very much like a scrolling sidebar, except you don't see it on the page. Instead, you see an anchor image of some sort, something that you tap, and then a sidebar window opens up in front of you that, again, scrolls and can have pictures and text and all sorts of stuff in it. And so those are two new ways to annotate text. So that's one of the big features you'll notice right off the bat. Let's see. Another big thing they've added, when you start up iBooks Author, you're presented with a list of templates. What kind of template do you want to use for your book? And in iBooks Author 1, all the templates were designed to be landscape view, with multiple columns. And you could flip the book vertically and it would present a reduced sort of version of the book that was mostly text with your annotations kind of off to the side. But they were graphically designed to be landscape with an optional portrait view. In iBooks Author 2, they've come up with portrait-only templates that are designed specifically to be seen only in portrait view and not landscape, but can let you put all your widgets and stuff right on the page like you would on a landscape view. So it's sort of like landscape view that's narrower and taller. And so there's like 4 or 5 templates for portrait-only view and 9 or so landscape with portrait templates. So they've added those new templates. Another big feature that you don't really notice until you actually have to use it has to do with audio and video. In iBooks Author 1, you were limited to M4V files for video and AAC files for audio. They had to have specific extensions and be just a specific type, and Apple told you exactly what it was. And in the first edition of the book, I told you, if you really need to convert it, you can use QuickTime, and it's very easy to do. In iBooks Author 2, Apple said, hey, we have this thing called QuickTime, and it can handle all sorts of media. So if you drop media that's compatible with QuickTime into your iBooks Author book as you're writing it, QuickTime will convert it for you to the format that iBooks Author needs. So you can now be far looser about the sorts of video you put in because you don't have to do the conversion yourself. So that's a huge savings for those who like to have audio or video on the page of their book. Let's see, I'm actually looking over here at my iPad where I'm looking at the What's New page from the book itself. So you try to do these things all at once.
I think that's known as eating your own dog food, Michael.
Let's see. They added, for those who are doing math books, MathML and LaTeX, for doing complex equations, and you can put that on the page now. That's not going to appeal to a lot of people, but there's a certain subset who really want very complex equations on the page of a book, and now you can import them very easily. I
have to address that. I at one time helped work on a project that was very formula and equation intensive, and you had no idea that you needed to go and basically get a special tool to to do all the equations. And these were fairly high level equations. Like,
stuff that Newton and Leibniz did, with the quill pen on paper. Really easy to draw those things, but it's really hard to typeset them.
It's hard to typeset them, and you don't realize how many there are. I mean, there are a lot.
Oh, gosh, yes. Mathematics is wacky.
Yeah. We're about to hear from all the math teachers.
No. It's wacky in a good way.
Yeah.
But it's definitely in it. You're not your linear text.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you think it's addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, there's a little more there.
Just way, yeah.
Yeah.
And one other thing you'll notice, and that's only if you're publishing to the iBookstore, the whole publishing dialogue for finishing your book and sending it out has been expanded and streamlined simultaneously. So it now walks you step by step through all the things that it's doing. It will automatically generate a sample version of your book for you as part of the package you submit to the iBookstore, and does a few other nice things. It does a sanity check on your book to make sure all the pieces are in place. And so you'll notice that if you publish books with iBooks Author 1 and have moved to 2. There's a whole bunch of other changes they've made that are subtle and just have streamlined a little bit the way the program itself works, or they've done the usual performance enhancements and stability fixes that you see in all the bug note releases. They've done an awful lot of that, so it's cleaned up and it's snappier. But it also is just smoother to use and makes a little bit more sense. Some of the things you had to work a little bit harder at and weren't completely reliable, version 1 piece of software, have been smoothed out and refined, and they've done an awful lot of those things. And many of them weren't even in Apple's release notes, you know, and just as I was working through the book and having to try out everything I tried out in the first version of the book to see if it was still true, I kept going, oh, this has changed. Oh, this has changed. And they were all little subtle changes, but they were important ones.
The newest version of PDF Pen from Smile is here. PDF Pen 6 can now export to Microsoft Word format and sports a new editing bar for faster access to tools and properties. PDF Pen 6 is also fully optimized for Retina displays, so it looks better than ever. And Mac OS X features autosave and versions are now fully supported. The new PDF Pen Pro 6 includes all that, plus gives users more control over document permission settings that restrict saving, printing, and copying, and simplifies creation of cross-platform interactive PDFs. Find out not only about all these new features, but all the capabilities of PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro at smilesoftware.com. Michael, zooming back out to maybe a 30,000-foot level.
Sure.
Do you think that iBooks author has changed the game or put pressure on ebook authors who to go beyond just the simple text you were talking about, the flowing text that is easy to produce, to make it a more rich multimedia experience?
I don't think it puts pressure on the authors so much as it gives the authors more options that they consider if they want. I mean, you know, a good flowing text thriller or detective story or, you know, love story or what have you still works just great. You know, and you don't need to gussy them up with all sorts of widgets and features and cross-references. You're just going to write that sort of thing. Flowing text is wonderful. It's wonderful for presenting, you know, propositional thought, you know, in a format that's well known and used, you know, text with citations and like that. But there's a lot of things that are really hard to do in just text alone. And if you're doing anything from a cookbook where you're explaining a process, or if you're doing, you know, a discussion, you know, of the solar system, and you really want to see what Kepler's law looks like, you know, acted out, you know, as planets are circling a gravitational source, you can illustrate it in ways that would really be hard to do with still pictures and text. So if you want to do that sort of book, if you want to provide that sort of information, if that's what the story you want to tell, you now have a tool that gives you a lot of capability to do that sort of thing. But you don't have to. And you shouldn't be feeling pressure. The first thing to consider is what is it you're trying to say? And then you look at the tools available to see how you're going to say it.
I guess I just see us moving toward a more multimedia world in every sense. And I agree, you know, for novel text.
Well, you know, an illustrated manuscript was a pretty nice piece of multimedia, you know.
Good point. Good point. And yeah, now we just have more multimedia. You can link out to the web. You can put moving illustrations in. I love the scrolling sidebar. I think that's a very cool idea.
Oh, yeah. And it looks so nice on the page because it just looks like a sidebar until you start to scroll through. You go, oh, my goodness, there's riches here below the end of the page. I'm sure a novelist with just flowing text and the scrolling sidebar could produce a very interesting novel with simultaneous narratives using things like scrolling sidebars and pop-ups and nothing more than that. You know, I mean, you know, you have your epistolary novels that go all the way back, you know, to, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name now. This is stuff that I know when I studied English literature. Richardson and like that, you know. So novels that are in the form of letters and like that, you know, you can do wonderful things with things like scrolling sidebars or voiceovers, you know, from an audio widget and like that. I mean, those could be fun things to do, but you don't necessarily have to use them to tell a story. But you could, and could make a very entertaining piece if you did. So
we go back to your initial comment that we have new opportunities. There are new dimensions you might add, but you don't have to.
Oh, exactly. You know, I've got a spice cabinet with, you know, 100 spices in it. They don't all end up in the same dish.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not.
Yeah, well, unless I'm really drunk and going, let's see what this will do.
No, this is not true confessions. No, don't Don't, that's another Take Control book. Take Control of Michael E. Cohen.
Impossible to write. Anyway,
what else is in the book, Michael? Because again, one of the other things we said in pre-show was that you said, "Boy, this is a really long book." So does that mean it got longer because of the changes, or
no? It was long all along. The first version was, I think, within 10 pages of the length of this one, because the only big changes were the two new widgets, really, and discussion of the portrait-only templates. That didn't add a whole lot of length to it. But what makes the book long is I try to do several things in it at once. The center, the white tasty filling of the Oreo, if you will, is about how to use the program itself. What you need to do the cover, the introductory media, how you set up a glossary or an index, how you do the table of contents, how you lay out the materials, how you put them on the page, how you arrange your chapters, how you move a chapter from one place to another if you need to reorganize things. All of the nitty-gritty of using the software as software. The first part of the book, though, is a more general look for those who are just coming into doing textbooks for the first time. Because there are a lot of teachers who have never done a textbook before who might look at this program and say, gee, I'd like to try it out, but I have no idea what goes into making a book. So I talk about how you plan it, what you need to think about if you're doing an interactive book that has a lot of media in it. Considering things like rights, how you keep track of the things that you're using and making sure you're not violating copyright. That's an important thing for teachers and any author to really know about. So I cover that sort of thing in the beginning of the book. At the end of the book, we go beyond just using iBooks Author to make a book. And I talk a bit about how to use iTunes Connect and the iBookstore. But I also go into how to prepare advanced reading copies for other readers, what you want to think about before you actually finish publishing your book. Get readers and feedback and stuff like that. So the book is bookended by material that isn't about the software so much as about the whole making a book experience.
Which in this scenario is probably extremely important, since this is not a document that is just flowing text. You're going to want a lot more feedback.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a bit more work to be done. Since you're getting a richer product, you have to invest a little more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You should never say my book is done. I just wrote the last word, I'm done. No, all you've finished is a draft. Still a long, long road to go. But also, it's because iBooks Author is appealing to not the professional writers necessarily, the professional publishers necessarily, although it's designed for, textbook publishers. But it's designed for people who aren't, in their day jobs, actual writers. Teachers and amateurs of all sorts, who may not know a whole lot about publishing and what goes into publishing, what an ISBN number is, which is something you really should know about if you're going to be getting into self-publishing. And self-publishing is becoming a very big movement these days. A lot of wannabe aspiring writers are looking at going the self-publishing route for this very simple reason, is you don't have to have a publisher sign your work up, give you a contract. You can publish it yourself and see if you get any sales. And there have been some books that have done very, very well because they started that way. So there's that pot of gold at the end of rainbow enticing people, but you need to know a little bit about what goes into making a book before you begin. So you do need to think about things like your assets, your cover art, the editorial process, as well as just, how do I get the words on the screen?
But just like so many tools that Apple has given us, I'm thinking about iMovie and GarageBand, maybe iPhoto to a slightly less degree. It gives you the opportunity to sort of dive in head first. I mean, if you really want to do this professionally and properly, they're going to grab your book. But there's nothing that says that someone watching this interview can't say, I think I'll check out this iBooks Author thing. They would be better served by getting your book and going step by step, but they can jump in and play a little bit, and that's what Apple seems to excel at in so many ways. And the people who right now are criticizing Apple for not having done anything really big, I think they miss the fact that Apple has done a lot of little things like this that create cultures almost and opportunities for people to use instead of just hitting another one out of the park with another iPhone or another iPad.
Well, yeah, you know, the big flashes like the iPhone, like the iPad, you know, that changes the paradigm, you know, always get the attention. But, you know, a glacier is a huge thing that moves very, very slowly, but can transform the landscape over time. So there's a metaphor you can play with.
Yeah, that's a great one, because that's exactly what happens. You think about what digital photography has done to the photography industry and the part that Apple has played in that, making it approachable and easy for the average user.
One of the pieces of advice I give in the book is, you know, I give two contradictory pieces of advice in two bullet points, one following the other. The first one is, don't let all the widgets distract you. You know, you got to get down and actually write your book, you know, so don't end up endlessly fiddling and playing. And then followed immediately is the note, before you really even dive in, give yourself a few days to just productively fool around. Just to play, make a bunch of books you don't intend to do anything with, just so you can try things out and see what they do and see how they look, without ever wanting to have a finished book. Just productive playing around. And I think you need to do both when you've got software like this. You have to have a project in mind, or why are you doing it in the first place? But you also want to give yourself the freedom to just experiment without investing your hard-won media or your hard-written text to the project. Just mess around, and you need to do both.
Unless you contradict me here, I'm going to give you credit for productive playing around.
Well, I say productive fooling around, but I often don't use. I use a different F word sometimes.
Well, well, this is a clean show, but I think we know what you mean. But,
yeah.
But it's a great point. A lot of us did it without knowing we were doing it. When desktop publishing came around and we started fooling with all the fonts, you know, all of a sudden we had, 15 fonts or so to play with. And if we got, you know, an upgrade pack, it was 30 fonts. And you know, who didn't use
there are new borders in Quark too. Yeah.
And who didn't put every single font on one page at one time?
Oh, absolutely. But, you know, you learn from your excess.
Yep.
And you need to give yourself the freedom to do that. Because of the, you know, as a species, you know, as hominids on the savannas of Africa, we learned by playing as children. That's how we learn stuff. We do role playing. Let's pretend. It's a natural thing that we do. So let's pretend we're making a book. Let's pretend we're putting a picture in it. Let's pretend we want a movie here.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. But I like the productive playing. That really encapsulates something that I say on the show frequently when we talk about software. You know, play with it. Well, that doesn't mean like, you know, going to play a game, and no offense to the gamers. Don't send email, folks. But, you know, play with it. It doesn't mean that you have to. I personally believe that, at least for me, my best way to play is to have a project that I'm trying to produce. And an objective, because that way I have a goal in mind. Now I've got to figure out how to get there. But that said, there's still something to be said for just messing around with something.
Well, even if you have a project in mind and you can use the materials from your project, you should also be aware that you can make throwaway projects, even with material that you're going to use again in another place. Just so you have something sort of real to look at, but you know you're not going to ever save this thing, so it doesn't have to be perfect. If you messed up, that's fine, because you learn from messing up. So you create, you know, sample books just to try out different things. And if it doesn't work well, okay, now I learned something from that.
Yeah.
In the course of writing this revision, I had a folder of books that I was created just to try out various things, you know, that I knew were never going to be used for anything. So I've got, you know, text boxes that link from here to here to there to there. Oh, cool, I can do that. I never really want to necessarily, but I see how that's done. So, you know, that's part of the fooling around process.
Michael, let's wrap this up with your unique perspective. And for the folks that maybe have not seen you on the show before, they don't know that you, back in the day, which was not that long ago, were one of the key players in producing some of the interactive CD titles that were so popular for a while.
In the early 90s, I worked at the Voyager company, and we had, that was actually my introduction to electronic books. We invented electronic books on Pacific Coast Highway in 1990, more or less. I mean, other people were doing the same sort of thing at the same time, but that's where we came up with the expanded books, which were the first, I think, probably the first commercially successful line of electronic books. They were designed for Apple's PowerBook, which was brand new at the time, and they were on floppy disk. You could buy a book. I'm going to step off camera for just half a second.
We have the Jeopardy music playing now because I don't know where Michael's gone. But he obviously has something in mind that is going to be very interesting.
Well, I was just going to bring up, one of the Voyager programs. This is Poetry in Motion. And they were sold very much like books, except inside there was media stored in them. So this is just like one of the covers. But we sold them like books in bookstores. Only you'd pull out the media and stick it in your computer and read it. And that was around the early 90s, 90, 91.
And that was so cutting edge. I mean, I know I had some. I mean, I probably have viewed your work without knowing it was yours. So from that perspective, from the perspective of having been at the creation and knowing what you were trying to accomplish then, how far along the road toward your ultimate goal is iBooks Author? 25, 55, 85?
Well, iBooks Author, or something like it, could probably have been done many years earlier than it was done. But what happened and what kind of changed everything that we're doing at Voyager was this little side project of Tim Berners-Lee called the World Wide Web.
I've heard of that.
That in the mid-90s completely disrupted the multimedia industry. And suddenly everything that was being sold on CD-ROM, all the interactive media, oh, forget it, the web's taking it over, put it online instead. And so everything was being done through the browser. And then we had the browser wars of the late 90s and the early thousands, between Microsoft and Netscape and the sanctions and everything else, about who controls the World Wide Web. So ebooks kind of fell into a backwater. Nobody was really interested in it because everything was going online. And it was only with the creation of digital devices you could carry in your pocket that would be ubiquitous, like the iPhone or the iPod Touch, that interest really began to develop again around self-contained books that wouldn't have to be on the internet to be used. And then you had the iPad, which is a damn fine reading device. And you had the Kindle that came out just before that, which is a damn fine reading device. And suddenly the whole idea of an interactive book made sense again, independent of the World Wide Web. So iBooks Author is where, if Voyager had continued with the Expanded Books Toolkit and like that, it's probably where we would have been about 10 years ago if we hadn't taken this little side journey into the world of the World Wide Web.
Interesting. It makes perfect sense, too.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, they're also feeding off of one another. A lot of the stuff we learned about putting stuff on the web and about making interactive presentations on the web feed back into things like iBooks Author and other ebook publishing systems.
And I do think there's something to be said in a world that seems to be right now becoming addicted to streaming media. It's fascinating to me to see how much the media we already own seems to be getting lost in that conversation. The collections of movies that we had maybe on DVD that we've ripped to our computers, the collections of music that we had on God knows what media and have ripped down to a digital format.
Those things on the wall behind me over there.
Yeah.
Which, just a sample of what I also have in boxes in various storage places around the Southern California area.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there is something to be said about a self-contained package that can be put on an iPad, taken wherever you are, even to those few remote locations in every city where there's no Wi-Fi or no cellular, or maybe that you just don't want to pay for it. That it's better to have it with you.
Yeah, you don't always need to be connected. It is nice, even with a standalone package like an ebook, to be connected, though, because I'll be reading a book on my iPad, and then I'll maybe go somewhere. My iPad's still at home. But I got my iPhone in my pocket, and it just happens to have a copy of the same book that I was reading on my iPad, and when I pull it out of my pocket, it contacts the internet for just a second and says, oh, you were on page 63, and it turns my book to where I was on a different device. So there's, interactivity and connectedness that's obvious, and then there's stuff that's very subtle. Exactly.
So we go to take control books MacVoices.com, obviously, to get this book. What's the pricing on this revision for new people and for
it's $15 for people who've never bought it before.
But it's a free update?
I believe it's a free update.
Great.
Because as we speak right now, we're about to go into production on it next week. So as far as I know, it's a free update. That's what we've been saying all along.
Michael, every time we talk, we talk part practicality, part philosophy, and I think it's fascinating. We really appreciate the time.
It's always a pleasure.
All right, now get back to work. Folks, that's Michael E. Cohen. He's the author of the newest edition of Take Control of iBooks Author, version 1.1. That covers iBooks Author 2. Let's be very clear on that. I'll have links in the show notes to everything, to the Take Control books, to Michael's bio, so you can see everything else he does. Please check out our website at MacVoices.com. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and we'll see you back here again next time on Mac Voices, the talk of the Mac community. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and for more Apple, Mac, and tech-related shows, including Mac Voices, Mac Notables, the Mac Jury, and the Mac Voices Briefing. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.